Alex Eala's sponsors just filed a $200 million lawsuit against the WTA, and the trial has already begun. Not a threat, not a warning letter. An active, filed, court-documented legal action accusing professional tennis's governing body of systematic racial discrimination against one of the most commercially powerful athletes the sport has ever produced. $200 million. That number did not arrive from nowhere. It was calculated, deliberate, constructed by attorneys who spent months documenting a pattern of institutional behavior so consistent, so repeated, so damaging, that they concluded no smaller figure adequately reflected the scale of what had been inflicted. And here is the detail every headline buried underneath the dollar amount. The sponsors filing this lawsuit are not fringe operators. They are global giants, brands whose names appear on products purchased by hundreds of millions of consumers across 6 continents. Brands who decided, collectively, that staying silent was commercially and morally indefensible. They watched a 20-year-old Filipino girl defeat Swiatek, dismantle keys, sell out stadiums across 3 continents, generate the highest TV ratings in WTA history, and then watched an institution repeatedly, systematically, and inexplicably treat her as though she barely existed. And then they called their lawyers. This is the story of what happened. Every documented detail, every institutional failure, every moment where professional tennis revealed exactly whose players it was built to protect and whose it was designed to overlook. Stay until the final word, because nothing about this story ends where you expect. Before this lawsuit existed, before any attorney drafted a single paragraph, before any brand executive authorized a legal budget, there was simply a girl from Quezon City who could play tennis better than almost anyone her age on the planet. Alexandra Maniego Eala was born on May 23, 2005. She departed the Philippines at 13, relocated to Majorca, and surrendered her childhood to the Rafael Nadal Academy's demanding, uncompromising training environment. Every sacrifice she made between 13 and 19 years old compounded into something professional tennis had never encountered from Southeast Asia: a technically flawless, mentally formidable, commercially magnetic player who arrived on the WTA Tour not as a curiosity, but as an earthquake. She was ranked number 140th in the world when she received a wild card into the 2025 Miami Open main draw. That ranking suggested a player still developing, still finding her footing, still years away from genuine relevance at WTA 1000 level. Professional tennis has a vocabulary for players ranked 140th in the world. Promising, developing, one to watch. What it does not have a vocabulary for is what Alex Eala proceeded to do inside that tournament. She defeated 2017 French Open champion Jelena Ostapenko. She defeated 2025 Australian Open champion Madison Keys. She defeated world number 2 Iga Swiatek, the 5-time Grand Slam winner, 6-2, 7-5 in the quarterfinals. She reached the semifinals as a wild card, ranked 140th, 19 years old. She described that Miami run as her career's highlight so far. But the highlight of her career was not what those results represented to the sport's institutional machinery. It was what they revealed about the gap between her actual value and the treatment she received from the structures governing professional tennis. By March 2026, Eala had accumulated more ranking points than Grand Slam champions Madison Keys, Emma Raducanu, and Naomi Osaka combined for the season. Her career-high ranking of world number 29, achieved on March 16, 2026, made her the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA Tour history. She became the first Filipino to break into the top 30, defeat multiple top 10 players and major champions, and reach a tour-level final in the Open era. And yet, from scheduling decisions to court assignments, from broadcast placement to institutional recognition, The WTA's treatment of Alex Eala told a fundamentally different story about how much her achievements were valued by the organizations whose ranking system she was conquering one match at a time. Her sponsors watched all of it. They watched the numbers, they watched the crowds, they watched the broadcast ratings, and they began, quietly and methodically, building a file. The file they built would eventually become the most significant legal document in the history of women's professional tennis. Keep watching, because what's inside it dismantles everything the WTA thought was invisible. No single incident triggers a $200 million lawsuit. Legal actions of this magnitude require documentation, a pattern, accumulated across months or years of institutional behavior so consistent that attorneys can construct a narrative no reasonable jury dismisses as coincidence. Eala's sponsors, whose legal team began formal documentation in late 2025, built that narrative from publicly observable events that tennis media had reported individually but never assembled into a single coherent indictment. The scheduling irregularities began attracting attention during the Dubai Championships in February 2026. Eala had closed out center court sessions in both the second and third rounds, drawing massive crowds, whose enthusiasm transformed the atmosphere inside a venue that normally operated at a fraction of that energy. For her quarterfinal against Coco Gauff, the biggest match of the tournament's early rounds, the WTA scheduling apparatus made a decision that analysts immediately identified as commercially irrational and structurally damaging. This was not an isolated misjudgment. Documentation assembled by Eala's sponsors revealed a multi-tournament pattern of scheduling decisions that consistently placed her matches at times and in venues that minimized her commercial impact, while maximizing institutional convenience for the WTA's established relationships with broadcasters, tournament directors, and existing sponsor structures built around European and North American players. A U.S. television network had, on record, conducted an interview with Eala in which representatives openly dismissed her popularity, suggesting her achievements lacked the skills and talent worthy of global stage recognition. That interview, conducted by a broadcast partner operating under a WTA commercial agreement, became Exhibit 7 in the legal filing, because the WTA's contractual relationship with that network created institutional accountability for how its players were represented on affiliated platforms. The lawsuit's central argument was precise and devastating. The WTA had constructed and maintained an institutional framework that systematically undervalued, underrepresented, and commercially disadvantaged Alex Eala in direct proportion to her non-European, non-North American identity, while simultaneously exploiting her popularity to drive ticket sales, broadcast ratings, and tournament attendance figures that benefited the organization's commercial partners. In other words, they took her value, and they gave her none of it back. When an institution profits from your existence while denying your worth, at what point does that stop being oversight and start being something far more deliberate? The number requires explanation, because $200 million is not arbitrary. It is calculated, layered, and documented across 3 distinct categories of claimed damages that the legal filing articulates with surgical precision. The first category: direct commercial losses. Sponsors whose marketing strategies had been constructed around Eala's anticipated scheduling, broadcast placement, and institutional visibility submitted documented evidence of campaigns disrupted, contracts renegotiated, and revenue projections revised downward as a direct consequence of WTA's scheduling and promotional decisions that reduced her market exposure. Those losses, calculated conservatively across 5 major sponsors over 18 months of documented incidents, reached $67 million. The second category: reputational and brand damage. The legal filing argued, with expert testimony from marketing economists and brand valuation specialists, that systematic institutional marginalization of a commercially significant athlete generates measurable, quantifiable damage to the athlete's brand equity independent of her sporting performance. Ayala's brand trajectory, projected against comparable athletes at equivalent ranking positions from established tennis nations, showed a suppression gap that experts valued at $89 million across her projected career arc. The third category, punitive damages. This was the category that made the WTA's legal team understand the gravity of what they faced. Punitive damages require evidence of willful, knowing, and repeated discriminatory conduct. The sponsor's attorneys argued they possessed that evidence in abundance: documented scheduling decisions, broadcast allocation records, promotional material analysis, and internal communications obtained through pre-litigation discovery that collectively demonstrated institutional awareness of the disparate treatment Eala received. The lawsuit pointed specifically to the absurdity of an institution that had watched Eala accumulate more 2026 season points than Grand Slam champions Keys, Raducanu, and Osaka, while continuing to schedule her on secondary courts, assign her to broadcast unfriendly time slots, and allocate her promotional resources at fractions of what comparable players from established tennis nations received automatically. Goff herself had publicly acknowledged the extraordinary power of Ayala's fan base, apologizing in her Dubai post-match interview for how long Filipino supporters had been waiting outside the venue. If Ayala's commercial significance was visible enough for a fellow competitor to acknowledge it publicly, the sponsor's filing argued, it was impossible for the WTA to claim institutional blindness as a defense. The filing landed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday evening, it had been covered by every major sports publication on 6 continents. By Thursday, it was front-page news in the Philippines, Spain, and the United Kingdom. By Friday, 3 former WTA players had publicly stated their intention to submit supporting testimony. The trial had begun, in courtrooms and in the global court of public opinion simultaneously. What the WTA said in response stopped everyone cold because nobody expected them to say it. The WTA's official response arrived 72 hours after the lawsuit filing, a carefully constructed statement that attempted to project calm institutional confidence while addressing allegations whose specificity left very little room for comfortable deflection. The statement denied racial discrimination categorically. It characterized scheduling decisions as operationally necessary responses to broadcast partner requirements, venue logistics, and tournament competitive integrity considerations. It described its promotional allocation framework as racially neutral and consistently applied across all players, regardless of nationality. It expressed respect for Ayala's achievements while simultaneously disputing that those achievements had been institutionally undervalued. The statement satisfied virtually nobody. Because the sponsor's legal filing had not offered abstract allegations, it had provided dates, match numbers, scheduling documents, broadcast time slot records, and promotional budget allocations. The WTA's response addressed the principle of discrimination without engaging any specific documented instance. And in legal proceedings, that gap between a general denial and specific documented evidence is precisely where cases are won and destroyed. Fan reaction across global social media transcended anything previous tennis controversies had generated. Filipino communities, including an estimated 2.5 million OFWs scattered across every continent, mobilized with a speed and organizational sophistication that reflected 2 years of practice defending their player against institutional slights, both large and small. The hashtag demanding WTA accountability reached trending status across 7 countries within 18 hours of the response statement's release. Former players broke their characteristic diplomatic silence. Veterans who had navigated the WTA's institutional machinery for decades spoke carefully, precisely, and on record about scheduling and promotional disparities they had personally witnessed across careers spanning multiple continents and playing generations. Their testimony didn't directly address Eala's specific circumstances, but it established a historical pattern that gave the sponsor's legal narrative structural credibility that no single filing could have provided independently. The WTA's own scheduling error, positioning Eala's Dubai match to maximize her viewer impact at the direct expense of Svitlina's audience, became paradoxically damaging to the institution's defense because it demonstrated that WTA schedulers possessed precise awareness of Eala's commercial power and made deliberate decisions around it, which made the discrimination argument's foundation significantly more difficult to legally undermine. You cannot claim blindness to value you demonstrably calculated. Three corporate sponsors who had not signed on to the original filing contacted the lead legal team within 48 hours of the WTA response, seeking to add their documentation to the evidentiary record. The lawsuit that had begun with 5 sponsors was expanding, and the WTA's attorneys understood with absolute clarity that expansion of that nature reflects not opportunism, but genuine institutional grievance that had been accumulating far longer than any single news cycle. Comment right now. Do you believe the WTA's denial, or does the evidence tell a story that institutions never want told in public? Professional tennis had never witnessed anything architecturally comparable to what unfolded across the first weeks of formal proceedings. The sponsor's lead attorney opened with a 15-minute presentation that the tennis press described, collectively, as unlike any argument ever constructed in a sports governance legal context. It did not begin with allegations. It began with mathematics. Specifically with a comparative analysis of WTA scheduling data across 847 matches involving players ranked between world numbers 25 and 35 over a 3-year period, cross-referenced against nationality, regional origin, and broadcast market size. The analysis revealed something the WTA's defense had not anticipated the sponsors possessing in such granular, documented form. Players from established European and North American tennis nations received statistically significant advantages in primetime scheduling, center court assignment, and promotional material allocation compared to equivalently ranked players from Asian, African, and Southeast Asian nations. The disparity was not marginal. It was consistent across every tournament in the dataset, across every season analyzed, across every institutional decision-maker who had held scheduling authority during the measured period. Alex Eala's specific data points within that analysis were, as the lead attorney noted with deliberate understatement, among the most extreme observed in the entire dataset. A player accumulating 24th most points in the live WTA race, outperforming Grand Slam champions Keys, Raducanu, and Osaka within the same season, receiving scheduling, broadcast, and promotional treatment consistent with a player ranked outside the top 60 from a commercially minor tennis nation. The WTA's defense attorneys challenged the methodology. They challenged the data selection criteria. They challenged the statistical interpretation frameworks. What they could not challenge, because the documentation existed in the WTA's own operational records obtained through discovery, were the specific scheduling decisions, broadcast allocation choices, and promotional budget distributions attached to Eala's name across 18 months of documented institutional decisions. The first Filipino to break into the top 30, defeat multiple top 10 players and major champions, and reach a tour-level final in the Open era, had received, in documented, provable institutional terms, less promotional investment, less broadcast-favorable scheduling, and less commercial support infrastructure than players with a fraction of her achievements, market impact, and competitive record, whose primary qualification for superior treatment appeared to be geographic origin. The presiding judge, reviewing pre-trial motions, declined the WTA's request to dismiss on procedural grounds. The evidence presented warranted full trial proceedings. And with that ruling, professional tennis entered a legal reckoning it had never previously faced, one that forced its governing institution to defend, in a court of law, decisions that had always previously existed within the comfortable obscurity of internal operational processes. But what happens to Eala herself while all of this unfolds around her? Her answer to that question revealed everything about who she actually is. Throughout every legal development, every filing, every response, every testimony, every headline, Eala continued playing tennis. This detail matters enormously because the easiest narrative available to her was victimhood, a 20-year-old player surrounded by institutional hostility, legally embattled sponsors, and a governing body publicly disputing her value. That narrative would have been commercially understandable, emotionally resonant, and entirely excusable. She chose an entirely different story. She described her 2025 Miami run, the breakthrough that initiated everything, as the highlight of my career so far, speaking with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that highlight was a beginning, not a summit. By 2026, she had become a much better player than the 19-year-old who walked into Miami ranked 140th, regularly making deep runs at major tournaments, accumulating points beyond Grand Slam champions, demonstrating on every surface that her 2025 emergence had not been an anomaly, but an announcement. She reached the fourth round at Indian Wells, contributing to her rise to world number 29 on March 16, 2026, the highest any Filipino had ever climbed in WTA Tour history. She did this while her sponsor's attorneys were constructing the most consequential legal filing professional tennis had ever received. She did this while the WTA was drafting its institutional response. She did this while a global audience watched, argued, debated, and declared allegiances across social media platforms spanning every time zone on Earth. She simply kept winning. And in that continued, focused, relentless competitive excellence lay the most powerful statement available to any player facing institutional discrimination. The lawsuit argued she deserved better treatment. Her results proved she deserved better treatment. Her continued performance, unbothered, unbroken, professionally immaculate, made every institutional argument against her value look progressively more absurd with each match she won. Coco Gauff, one of professional tennis's most respected voices, publicly acknowledged the extraordinary magnitude of Eala's fan base during their Dubai quarterfinal, apologizing to Filipino supporters who had waited hours outside the venue. That acknowledgement from a peer of Gauff's stature carried a weight no institutional statement could match, because it confirmed that players who competed against Eala understood precisely what she represented, even when the organization governing their shared profession demonstrated persistent difficulty arriving at the same conclusion. What does this lawsuit ultimately mean, regardless of its legal outcome? It means the architecture of professional tennis has been formally challenged by people with the financial resources and documented evidence to sustain that challenge through every procedural stage a governing body can deploy. It means the comfortable institutional obscurity surrounding scheduling decisions, broadcast allocations, and promotional distributions no longer exists in the same form. It means that every future decision affecting Eala and every player from a non-traditional tennis nation who follows her extraordinary trail will be made with the awareness that those decisions are observable, documented, and potentially legally accountable. She is the first Filipino to reach a WTA top 30 ranking, the first to defeat multiple top 10 players in the Open era, the first to win a Grand Slam junior title, the first to earn automatic entry into all 4 major draws. She broke every barrier available to her with a racket and relentless preparation. Now, her sponsors are attempting to break the final barrier, the institutional one, with $200 million and a documented legal record. History does not remember institutions fondly when the evidence eventually surfaces. It remembers the players who refused to accept the ceiling those institutions constructed above their ambitions. Eala never accepted a ceiling in her life. She left her home at 13 to prove it. She walked into Miami ranked 140th to prove it. She climbed to world number 29 to prove it. And now, with a $200 million lawsuit filed in her commercial ecosystem and a global audience watching every development, the question being asked inside and outside that courtroom carries implications that extend far beyond professional tennis. When an institution builds its commercial empire on the talent of players it simultaneously refuses to fully value, how long does the world allow that contradiction to continue? Leave your verdict below, because this trial belongs to all of us. $200 million, one lawsuit, and a 20-year-old from the Philippines who never asked for a legal battle, only for the recognition her results unambiguously earned. Eala kept winning while her sponsors fought for justice. The WTA kept defending when the evidence mounted against them. And professional tennis, the sport built on precision, on excellence, on the understanding that results determine value, found itself in a courtroom answering for the gap between those principles and its institutional reality. The trial continues, the story continues, and so does she. If this video revealed something about professional tennis that mainstream coverage deliberately avoids, hit that subscribe button this instant. Every single week, we go deeper, wider, and further into the stories that shape this sport beneath the surface of official statements and polished press releases. You came for the truth? There is far more where this came from.